Welcome to What's Treading with Tire Review, presented by Apex 2022. I'm Maddie Weiner, and on today's podcast, we're joined by Art Mayer, a contract writer and consultant that covers a wide range of topics in the tire industry. He has years of experience in the tire industry, working in a variety of roles for Dealer Tire and serving as a researcher for Smithers. He has previously been a speaker at Smithers Traction conferences, covering the emerging areas of sensors and intelligent tires. Recently, he wrote the report, The Impact of Supply Chain Disruption on the Tire Industry, for Smithers, and is here today to share his research. So, Art, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So let's get into it. You published this report on the supply chain disruption last year with Smithers. So a lot of manufacturers have told us that a lot of this disruption in the tire supply chain started with shutdowns due to COVID. From your research, how would you describe the tire supply chain today?
Well, unfortunately, it's anything but normal. The report I wrote last year was a snapshot at the time, which already seemed like a pretty messy and intractable situation. I did look at how things did start with COVID shutdowns, which it basically helped get supply and demand out of whack. You've got tire production shut down, you've got automotive production shut down. On the other hand, you had demand stimulus injected into the economy, at least in the U.S. and other markets as well, which kept demand relatively high relative to what the supply was. So I think that was probably where the genesis of this was. However, it's compounded. There have been ripple effects, secondary effects, and now we have other issues coming, which I know we're going to be touching on later, but most recently the Russia-Ukraine situation. So there's really not been much of an opportunity to get things back in balance. Just a day or two ago, I was looking at the latest report from Drury, which tracks maritime shipping, and they're talking about it still being the worst situation they've seen in 50 years in terms of the backlogs, the disruptions to the normal maritime trade flows, and that it might not even begin to get back to normal at all until early 2023. And that's probably a rosy scenario. It assumes no further things are going to be going wrong.
Wow.
But it did begin with the COVID shutdowns. And I'm sad to say that they're actually still going on if you look at China in terms of many industrial centers and ports. So that's going to kind of keep things roiled. And China being, of course, very important to the global automotive and tire sectors, it's going to continue to play out for some time. And then we still have port congestion off California as well. So let's say China does open up and the spigots are flowing again. Even then, we're not out of the woods because the disruptions will continue to cascade through the system.
Right.
And just as context, though, the automotive tire industry, but also its main customer, the automotive industry, have among the most globalized and complex supply chains out there. And even though we're maybe not seeing quite the problems in tire manufacturing you are in automotive, the delays to OE demand, especially given the roles that the OEMs are playing in tire development for electrification, for example. I think probably the chip, the semiconductor shortages and delays. I think it's like over a 26-week wait time on ordering chips.
Oh, wow.
That's going to continue to result in, I would say, sporadic plant shutdowns from time to time that are going to make planning more difficult, increase your wait time on vehicles.
For sure, yeah.
The electric vehicles coming out have, I'm not sure how many more, but many factors more chip intensivity in terms of the number of chips going into the vehicles than conventional ones. So in a sense, we're going to be becoming becoming more vulnerable, more exposed to these supply chain issues. In the meantime, even things as simple as wiring harnesses
Hmm.
are in short supply and causing plant shutdowns. And maybe that's more of a Ukraine Russia situation. A lot of that supply was coming out of that region. So anyway, I don't want to get too far afield here. There are probably a million things I could mention, but the supply chain probably is, in some respects, it seems to improve. Uh, but I think these latest setbacks might be keeping things pretty unsettled.
Right.
Um, I would add, though, that maybe there's a silver lining, not much of one, but the potential slowing of demand
Mm-hmm.
for new cars for driving itself due to the higher oil prices and other input costs may slow down tire demand to a point where there's less urgency to catch up with the production. I mean, maybe there's a possibility to bring supply and demand back into balance a little bit, although it's at an overall lower level of activity and profitability. So
Right,
it's
right.
not entirely positive, but got to look for some positives where you can.
Right, yeah, of course. Yeah. So a lot to unpack there, and something that stuck with me is this is sort of and correct me if I'm wrong, like the worst supply chain disruption we've had in 50 years. Is that right? That
Yeah, but that's the dreary perspective from the standpoint of maritime container shipping, and
okay.
we've and that's pretty significant whether you're shipping finished tires or raw materials. Now, one thing that I think I'm seeing here in when I wrote the report, and we'll see increasingly, is the reshoring of production, the moving of maybe automotive, but also tire production closer to the point of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
It's you're better able to tailor the mix to that particular market, uh, but it's also cheaper to ship the raw materials and then do the production and maybe have localized inventories to help be a buffer from this otherwise very far-flung globalized supply chain that's developed over the last several decades.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you say that because we've talked with a lot of manufacturers recently, probably over the last year that have said, oh, we're boosting capacity at our, North American plants, so you're saying, expect that or boosting capacity in other maybe areas where there's not conflict or uncertainty to maybe continue.
Yeah. Well, definitely, you want to kind of on the sourcing side, you want to try to minimize your exposure to troubled regions where there's
Yeah.
higher geopolitical risk. And unfortunately, that's a big. I mean, Russia and Ukraine and
Hmm.
the Russia Europe trade relationship. That's a pretty big thing to have destabilized. In the meantime, you might also. I mean, we have to keep an eye on China, the South China Sea, Taiwan, because a
Right.
lot of the high value added, sophisticated ships are coming out of Taiwan, for example. So there are a lot of things for planners to keep an eye on when it comes to different scenarios. But just from a more mundane standpoint, increasing production capacity close to market, having buffer stocks. I've read a lot about overseas manufacturers building more warehouses in the U.S., for example,
Right.
so they'll be better able to supply for a longer period. Should there be problems with replenishing?
Yeah, for sure. Very interesting. Okay. Yeah.
And some consolidation of distribution as well as of manufacturers might contribute to this. I mean, some recent the tire rack and discount tire combination, and then just this past week, I believe ATD in the U.S. has bought the Monroe wholesale distribution
Right.
operation. So additional efficiencies, additional capacities, redundancies in networks will become more attractive.
So you're saying all of this trickles down, to distributors and then eventually dealers, maybe as those efficiencies maybe are realized, dealers could be getting, tires quicker, sooner. Is that a fair assumption or too early to
Well,
tell? I don't know.
I would say the retailers and distributors have this has been going on for like 2 years now. So they've
Right.
already been adapting. They've been trying to bolster inventories of key SKUs. They've been trying to do a better job of demand planning, in some cases using artificial intelligence in some parts of the operation, to better understand what to pre-order, what to have, uh, understanding how to sell substitutes if necessary, working more carefully with the customers more intensely in order to anticipate what their needs are going to be.
For sure.
In the long run, I think you're going to see more improved tire management programs and demand forecasting, where you're actually better able to monitor tire wear and replacement likelihood. So again, these aren't necessarily short-term solutions, but in which the industry has to adapt up and down the chain to
For
something
sure.
that's probably not going to be very normal for a while.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it, and we've definitely been experiencing that. Now, we've talked about some of the supply sort of, or capacity shifting to more localized markets. But another thing you said that I was intrigued by was the semiconductor shortage. And sometimes we don't think that relates to the tire industry, but it definitely does because of new vehicles. And you were saying that it's taking 26 weeks to get some of these semiconductors to the factories. Is,
Yeah,
is that right?
yeah,
Is it?
that's the average lead time, I think, for placing an order for semiconductors.
Ah,
This
okay.
is, yeah, and but it's fluctuating. I mean, I just saw that a report in the past week that uh, an extra 2 days have been added onto that, and part of the problem is the some of the raw materials are even the, further upstream, like neon, for example. Russia
Okay.
is a big exporter of neon for chip manufacture. So to the extent it's not available, or there's sanctions, or there have to be ways to find alternative sources, it's just going to add more delay or possibly more cost. And if at the same time you've got more people buying electric vehicles and you've got
Mm-hmm.
vehicles with more and more chips, the the uh, the supply demand situation will become more acute.
Yeah,
And
very
then
interesting.
that affects OE tire sales, obviously, but that's where a lot of the innovation is. It does make the replacement market in the short term more important, but then there are other factors that are reducing replacement demand, such as the cost of gas, reducing miles driven or commuting.
Right.
I mean, maybe you have some rebound in commuting from the most serious COVID restrictions, but now having gas in the U.S. maybe averaging $4.71, with Washington State starting to prepare to. You might have seen that they're preparing their signage on gas stations to be able to accept four figures, so like $10 gas.
Right, right. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So
Crazy.
I don't think that's going to be too easy to take in stride. I think that's probably between that and the rising tire prices that we're seeing. It, it has potential to kind of it goes beyond the supply chain. It goes to whether we might even have kind of a recessionary environment, or a big kind of trough like you did after the 2008 financial crisis.
Right, right. Yeah. And it's interesting. I've heard from other manufacturers. I believe you said this earlier that, maybe towards the end of the year, demand may soften. So
Yeah,
is
the
that
one thing, softer tire demand would possibly enable, without too many difficulties, kind of an inventory replenishment situation.
right?
So you're not having this crazy mismatch like you've seen with the whiplash effects of shutdowns plus demand subsidies, et cetera.
What are some current and potential disruptive factors to the tire industry today? We've talked about some, but are there others that maybe we haven't discussed?
Yeah. There's some that are kind of underlying and ongoing that were in their own right complex enough without this overlay of different supply chain problems. And some of these are affecting the supply chain, and some maybe not so much. Some of them might be positive. For example, the increase in electric car sales that we're seeing, which in turn is supply a lot of government mandates eventually to phase out internal combustion engine cars.
Uh-huh.
That's resulting in a lot of extra tires for electric vehicles. So you've still got the conventional tires there. You've got the new tires coming in for electric vehicles. So it's greatly increasing SKU complexity at the manufacturing level, but also at the ordering and inventory level. So I would say the ongoing or accelerating shift to electric cars is by itself a pretty significant disruptive factor. It's just a little more in slow motion. Now, there's a positive trend, I think, going on from the standpoint of tire management and utilization and replenishment, and that is the tendency for vehicle ownership to increasingly shift from private ownership into fleets.
Oh, right, of course.
You can see precursors to that in the growth of the ride and car sharing services. So I think, especially as autonomous vehicles are pursued, you're going to see more and more of this migration to a fleet model. Now, these companies are going to be on top of tire management. They're going to probably have more sensor-equipped tires that are not just reporting on pressure and temperature, but also tread depth.
Right.
And they can get real-time information on the tire status of the fleet and when they're going to need more tires. And we'll see better tire management and replenishment, consolidation of buyers. And I think that's going to help mitigate some of the supply chain issues downstream of manufacturing.
So how are these supply chain factors influencing the push to more sustainable sourcing? Sustainable sourcing is huge in the industry right now. Sustainable sourcing of raw materials and really the manufacture of tires.
I think these issues have actually, if anything, accelerated the trends that I already saw happening in terms of the sourcing. There was already a wish to get away from oil-based products, such as carbon black and synthetic rubbers, and the particular issues around the oil price and the where a lot of those products come from, like Russia, for example, makes it more imperative than it already was to find non-oil-based alternatives, to find substitutes such as recycled carbon black, reclaimed carbon black,
right,
or novel versions of it that don't use oil. I think there's some even some biomass sources that are used, and of course the push towards using HDS silica, already very important to achieve lower rolling resistance, particularly with the electric vehicle tires. So it's going to push HDS, it's going to push RCB, and all sorts of biosourcing of sustainable rubber alternatives. More use of natural rubber, although then you've got the whole sustainability issue behind responsible harvesting. You're dependent on certain parts of the world there. So so natural rubber will be important, but I think the really big changes are going to come with the oil product substitution.
Now, you mentioned in the report that the tire industry is highly sensitive to regional and global challenges that can limit or delay sourcing, production, and tire distribution. You've talked about that a little bit in terms of China and the Russia-Ukraine situation. So with that situation in particular, can you describe how you're seeing the current Russia war on Ukraine impacting the tire supply chain?
Well, for one thing, the loss of the Ukraine and Russia markets and production to the global tire ecosystem is a bit of a shock.
Hmm.
in maybe not huge markets, but a lot of the ingredients are coming from there. In the meantime, you've got the effect of sanctions just generally on in particular European trade and energy costs. Um, there's an impact on the tire production itself. A lot of the companies Continental, Michelin, Bridgestone, Yokohama, especially Nokian, are affected by the sanctions and their need to kind of at least back away from producing in Russia at this time. The price increases are having effects everywhere. It's already very broadly disruptive, and I'd mentioned even things like wire harnesses for automotive production are being held up.
Hmm.
The thing that I find most concerning is that even if you just look at the Russia-Ukraine situation, um, it's easy to see how that's becoming a proxy war between the collective West and Russia, which, at the moment, I don't see anyone looking for off ramps. So I'm a little concerned about escalation and then maybe opportunistic things happening over in Taiwan, for example. So, so,
Hmm.
so, we could be just doing a dress rehearsal for some somewhat more dire scenarios, but I hope not.
Yeah, yes, same here. Yeah. Art, I'm wondering, there's a lot going on in the tire supply chain today, a lot of factors, a lot of new technologies, but I want to end this podcast on a positive note for the industry.
Yeah.
So, whether it's on the dealer side, the distributor side, the manufacturer side, what are some positive things, you're seeing that you think will greatly, I guess maybe boost the industry down the line?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of investment going into tire manufacturing, quite aside from any kind of material substitution.
Hmm.
And basically, you need to, I think the tire industry is going to be able to, with this technology investment, meet the ever increasing objectives for reduced rolling resistance. They're going to start to be able to make progress on capturing the tire wear particles, which are um, an emissions issue, not for carbon dioxide, but just for the environment generally.
Right.
So that's a huge issue that improvements in mixing and manufacturing are capable of addressing with the proper investment.
Hmm.
Um, and the continued advancement in the tires is going to make a big environmental contribution in terms of fuel consumption or battery use. So I'm very optimistic about that.
For
Um,
sure.
a lot of these investments are the fact that so many of these investments and changes are not being derailed but are being accelerated by the uncertainty. I think is a very positive thing.
Well, no, thank you so much for your time today and for being on the podcast. I've so enjoyed our conversation, and yeah, hope to have you on again with maybe another update here in the future.
Yes, I would hope for things to improve somewhat, and then we would want to talk about that for sure.
Yes, yes, sounds good. Well, thanks so much for your time today, and yeah, have a good one.